The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sergeant Maria Santos stepped out of the transport vehicle. Her boots hit the dusty ground with a soft thud, and she immediately felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. The whispers started almost instantly. "That's her? The one they're sending to our unit. She looks like she belongs in a kitchen, not on a battlefield. This has to be some kind of joke." Maria kept her expression neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. At 26, she had heard every variation of doubt and dismissal that could be thrown at a female soldier. Her small frame and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her, which had become both a burden and an unexpected advantage throughout her military career. The compound buzzed with activity as soldiers from various units prepared for the joint training exercise. This was no ordinary drill. It was a comprehensive evaluation that would determine which soldiers would be selected for an elite special operations unit. The best marksmen, tacticians, and field operatives from across the military had been gathered here for 2 weeks of intensive testing. Colonel Richards approached her with a clipboard, his weathered face showing neither welcome nor hostility. "Santos, you'll be bunking in Barracks C. Your gear inspection is at 0800 tomorrow, followed by physical assessments. The real testing begins Monday." "Yes, sir," Maria replied crisply, shouldering her duffel bag. As she walked toward the barracks, she caught fragments of conversations that made it clear she was the only woman among the 43 candidates. The isolation felt familiar, but it still stung. She had earned her place here through exceptional performance in reconnaissance missions and marksmanship competitions, yet she knew that to many of her fellow soldiers, she remained an outsider who needed to prove herself over and over again. The first few days passed in a blur of physical challenges and written examinations. Maria excelled in navigation exercises and tactical planning scenarios, but she noticed that her success was often attributed to luck or over-preparation rather than natural ability. When she outperformed others in endurance runs, she heard comments about her having something to prove. When she demonstrated superior field medicine skills, it was dismissed as typical nurturing instincts. The attitude that frustrated her most came from Staff Sergeant Kyle Morrison, a decorated sniper with 3 combat tours under his belt. Morrison had made it clear from day one that he considered her presence a distraction and a waste of resources. He never missed an opportunity to question her capabilities in front of other soldiers. "This isn't summer camp, Santos," he had said during a briefing about long-range reconnaissance. "When bullets start flying, your teammates need to know you can handle the pressure. Some of us have been shot at for real." Maria had remained silent, but her service record included 2 deployment tours where she had indeed been under fire. She had earned a commendation for evacuating wounded soldiers while under sniper attack, but Morrison either didn't know or didn't care about her actual combat experience. The tension reached a boiling point during the 4th day of training. The candidates were participating in a complex scenario that involved infiltrating an enemy position and extracting valuable intelligence. Maria had been assigned to a team led by Morrison, along with 2 other soldiers who clearly shared his skeptical view of her abilities. The exercise began before dawn. Maria's team was responsible for establishing an overwatch position while other teams moved through the simulated enemy territory. As they reached their designated hill, Morrison immediately began positioning himself with his rifle while directing the others to set up communication equipment. "Santos, you stay back and monitor the radio," he instructed. "Leave the real work to those who know what they're doing." Maria bit back her response and took her assigned position, though she noticed several tactical errors in Morrison's setup. His chosen firing position offered good visibility but poor concealment, and he had failed to establish proper backup positions in case they needed to relocate quickly. She considered pointing out these issues, but decided against it, knowing it would only fuel his resentment. As the exercise progressed, it became clear that Morrison's overconfidence was becoming a liability. He missed several targets that should have been routine shots, and his poor positioning had indeed been spotted by the opposing team. When simulated enemy forces began closing in on their position, Morrison's frustration boiled over. "This whole setup is wrong," he muttered, adjusting his rifle scope aggressively. "I can't get a clear sight picture from here." Maria watched as he continued to struggle with shots that she knew he should be making easily. The problem wasn't his skill. Morrison was undoubtedly a capable sniper, but his emotional state was affecting his performance. The pressure of leading a team that included someone he considered inadequate had clearly gotten under his skin. When Morrison missed his fifth consecutive shot, jeopardizing the entire mission scenario, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She quietly moved forward and observed his technique, quickly identifying the issues causing his problems. "Sergeant Morrison," she said softly, "your breathing pattern is inconsistent, and you're overcompensating for wind drift. The scope might also need a minor adjustment." Morrison turned to glare at her, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I don't need shooting advice from someone who probably learned marksmanship from video game. I'm just trying to help the team succeed," Maria replied evenly. "Help?" Morrison's voice rose slightly. "You want to help? Then stay out of the way and let the professionals work." The other team members shifted uncomfortably as the confrontation escalated. They were all aware that the exercise was being monitored and evaluated, and this kind of interpersonal conflict was exactly what the instructors were watching for. Maria took a deep breath and made another decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "If there's doubt about my qualifications, perhaps we should settle this properly. I challenge you to a marksmanship competition." The suggestion hung in the air like a live grenade. Morrison stared at her in disbelief, while the other soldiers exchanged glances. Challenging a decorated sniper to a shooting contest was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. "You've got to be kidding me," Morrison said finally. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I've made confirmed kills at distances you probably can't even see." "Then, it should be easy for you to accept," Maria replied calmly, "unless you're not confident in your abilities." The challenge was a calculated risk. Maria knew she was skilled, but Morrison's reputation was well-earned. However, she also knew that his emotional state was compromised, and sometimes that was more important than raw ability. More importantly, she was tired of being dismissed without being given a fair chance to demonstrate her capabilities. Word of the challenge spread through the compound like wildfire. By evening, nearly everyone involved in the training exercise had heard about the confrontation between Santos and Morrison. The reaction was mixed. Some soldiers were excited about the prospect of seeing the cocky sniper put in his place, while others viewed it as an inevitable humiliation for the lone woman in their ranks. Colonel Richards called both soldiers to his office that evening. His expression was stern as he looked back and forth between them. "I understand there's been some kind of disagreement between you two," he said carefully. "This training exercise is about teamwork and professional development, not personal vendettas." "Sir, with respect, this isn't personal," Maria said. "This is about ensuring that every team member's capabilities are accurately assessed. If there are doubts about my qualifications, they should be addressed directly rather than allowed to undermine unit cohesion." Morrison shifted in his seat, but remained silent. Colonel Richards studied them both for a long moment. "Very well. Tomorrow morning, before regular training begins, we'll conduct an informal marksmanship assessment. Both of you will demonstrate your skills, and we'll put this matter to rest. But I want to be clear, regardless of the outcome, you will both conduct yourselves professionally for the remainder of this exercise. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," they both replied. As they left the colonel's office, Morrison finally spoke directly to Maria for the first time without hostility. "I hope you know what you're doing, Santos. There's going to be a lot of people watching tomorrow." Maria met his gaze steadily. "I'm counting on it." That night, Maria lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the magnitude of what she had set in motion. Every woman who might follow in her footsteps would be judged, at least partially, by her performance tomorrow. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming, but it also fueled her determination. She thought about her father, a career military man who had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. He had always told her that skill and preparation mattered more than what other people thought, but he had also warned her that sometimes you only get one chance to prove yourself. Tomorrow would be that chance. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a slight breeze that would make long-distance shooting challenging. Word had spread beyond the immediate training group, and Maria noticed several officers and senior NCOs gather near the shooting range as she made her way to breakfast. The attention was both encouraging and intimidating. Morrison appeared confident as he checked his equipment, surrounded by supporters who were clearly expecting him to vindicate their skepticism about female soldiers in combat roles. He had chosen his personal rifle, a customized M40 that he had used throughout his deployment tours. The weapon was perfectly calibrated to his preferences and had an almost legendary reputation among the snipers in his unit. Maria had requested a standard-issue M40 from the armory, which raised eyebrows among the observers. Using an unfamiliar weapon put her at a significant disadvantage, but she wanted to demonstrate that her skills weren't dependent on specialized equipment. As 0700 approached, both soldiers reported to the range, where Colonel Richards was waiting with several other officers, including a face that made Maria's stomach drop. General Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer of the entire training facility and one of the highest-ranking women in the military. The general's presence changed everything. What had started as a simple dispute between two soldiers had now become something much more significant. Maria realized that this competition would be seen as a test case for women in combat roles, and the results would likely influence policy decisions that affected thousands of female soldiers. General Hayes approached Maria directly, her expression unreadable. "Sergeant Santos, I understand you've requested this demonstration. Are you prepared for the possible consequences?" "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied, though her mouth felt dry. The general nodded slowly. "Very well. Colonel Richards will explain the parameters. The shooting contest would consist of 3 phases: precision shooting at known distances, rapid engagement of multiple targets, and long-range shooting under time pressure. It was a comprehensive test that would evaluate not just accuracy, but also adaptability and performance under stress. As Morrison prepared for the first phase, the crowd of observers continued to grow. Maria noticed that the female personnel on the base had somehow learned about the competition, and many had found excuses to be in the area. The pressure was enormous, but she tried to focus on the fundamentals her father had drilled into her years ago. Morrison performed well in the precision shooting phase, placing all his shots within the acceptable range and demonstrating the steady hand that had made him famous. The crowd murmured appreciatively as his results were announced. Maria stepped up to the firing line with the standard-issue M40, a weapon she had trained with but never used in actual combat. As she settled into position, she became acutely aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the range. Even the wind seemed to have stilled in anticipation of her first shot. She took a deep breath, found her natural point of aim, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure that had become second nature after years of practice. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she watched through the scope as her bullet struck the target. The spotter called out her score, and she heard a few surprised murmurs from the crowd. Her first shot had been not just accurate, but had actually scored higher than Morrison's best shot in the same phase. As she prepared for her second shot, Maria caught a glimpse of General Hayes' face and noticed something that gave her confidence. The general was no longer wearing the neutral expression of a detached observer. Instead, there was a look of focused attention, as if she was seeing something that genuinely surprised her. Maria's second and third shots were even better than her first, and by the time she finished the precision phase, it was clear that she had significantly outperformed Morrison. The silence from his supporters was deafening, while the female personnel who had gathered to watch were struggling to contain their excitement. But the competition was far from over, and Maria knew that Morrison would be fighting harder than ever to prove that her early success was just luck. The rapid engagement phase would test different skills entirely, and This was where Morrison's combat experience might give him a decisive advantage. As they prepared for the second phase, Maria noticed that Morrison's confident demeanor had been replaced by grim determination. He was no longer treating this as an easy victory, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The rapid engagement phase began with Morrison taking his position behind the firing line. 6 targets would appear at various distances for limited time windows, requiring quick target acquisition and accurate shooting under pressure. This was the kind of scenario that separated experienced combat veterans from ranged shooters, and everyone knew it. Morrison settled into his stance with practiced ease, his movements fluid and confident despite the tension of the previous phase. When the first target appeared at 300 meters, he engaged it smoothly, his shot striking center mass before transitioning to scan for the next threat. His combat experience showed clearly as he methodically engaged each target with minimal wasted motion. The crowd watched in respectful silence as Morrison demonstrated the skills that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. His final score in the rapid engagement phase was impressive, though not perfect. 2 of his shots had been slightly off-center due to what appeared to be rushed transitions between targets. Maria observed Morrison's performance carefully, noting his technique and timing. She had trained extensively in rapid engagement scenarios, but unlike Morrison, she had never done it while someone was actually shooting back. The question was whether her training would hold up under the pressure of proving herself in front of the most senior officers on the base. As she took her position, Maria forced herself to block out the crowd of observers. She focused on her breathing, her grip, and the fundamental principles that had guided her through countless hours of practice. When the first target appeared, she let her training take over. Her movements were different from Morrison's, perhaps less fluid, but more deliberate. Where Morrison had relied on instinct and experience, Maria applied systematic technique and precise timing. Her first shot struck the target cleanly, and she transitioned to search for the next threat with methodical efficiency. By the time the 6th and final target disappeared, Maria had achieved something that surprised even herself: a perfect score. Every shot had found its mark, and her transition times had been consistently faster than Morrison's. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant sound of other training activities elsewhere on the base. General Hayes stepped forward to personally verify the scoring, her expression now showing unmistakable interest. As she examined the targets, Maria noticed several of the senior officers exchanging meaningful glances. Whatever they had expected from this demonstration, it clearly wasn't what they were witnessing. Morrison's face had gone through several changes as Maria's performance became clear. The initial confidence had given way to concern, then to grudging respect, and finally to something that might have been professional admiration. He was a good enough soldier to recognize exceptional performance when he saw it, regardless of his personal biases. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant," Colonel Richards announced, though his tone suggested he was still processing what he had witnessed. "We'll move to the final phase in 10 minutes. During the brief break, Maria found herself surrounded by questions and congratulations from the female personnel who had been watching. Their excitement was infectious, but she knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The long-range phase would be the most challenging, and Morrison was renowned for his ability to make seemingly impossible shots. Sergeant First Class Jennifer Park, a combat medic who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, approached Maria with obvious admiration. "Whatever happens in the next phase, you've already made history today," she said quietly. "Every woman in uniform owes you a debt for this." The comment reminded Maria of the larger significance of what was happening. This wasn't just about proving herself to Morrison or even to the officers observing the competition. This was about opening doors for every woman who wanted to serve in combat roles, but had been held back by assumptions about their capabilities. General Hayes appeared at Maria's side, her presence causing the small crowd to disperse quickly. The general's expression remained professional, but there was something in her eyes that suggested deep personal interest in the outcome. "Sergeant Santos, may I have a word with you privately?" the general asked. They walked a short distance from the firing line, far enough to avoid being overheard by the other observers. General Hayes stopped and turned to face Maria directly. "I want you to understand something," the general said, her voice low and serious. "I've been fighting for expanded combat roles for women for my entire career. I've faced every argument about physical limitations, emotional stability, and unit cohesion that you can imagine. What you're doing here today goes far beyond settling a disagreement with Sergeant Morrison." Maria nodded, unsure how to respond. The general continued, "There are people watching this demonstration who have the power to influence policy that affects thousands of female soldiers. Your performance today will be discussed in briefing rooms and congressional hearings for months to come. I need to know that you're prepared for that level of scrutiny." "I understand, ma'am," Maria replied. "I'm ready." General Hayes studied her for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "I believe you are. Now go show them what we're capable of." The final phase of the competition would test long-range shooting capabilities under time pressure. 3 targets had been positioned at distances of 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Each shooter would have 90 seconds to engage all 3 targets, with scoring based on both accuracy and speed. Morrison approached this phase with renewed determination. The 1,000-meter shot was at the extreme range of the M40 rifle, requiring perfect calculation of wind conditions, bullet drop, and atmosphere pressure. It was the kind of shot that had built his reputation, and he clearly intended to remind everyone why he was considered one of the best snipers in the military. His preparation was meticulous. Morrison spent several minutes studying wind indicators and range cards, making mental calculations that would determine the success or failure of his shots. When he finally settled into his firing position, his concentration was absolute. The first shot, at 600 meters, struck within inches of the target center. The second, at 800 meters, was equally impressive. For the 1,000-meter shot, Morrison made final adjustments to his scope and took extra time to ensure perfect sight alignment. The shot echoed across the range, and everyone waited for the spotter's call. When it came, there was a collective intake of breath. Morrison had missed the target entirely. Whether due to miscalculation, equipment issues, or simple bad luck, his final shot had sailed wide of the mark. Morrison's frustration was visible as he cleared his rifle and stepped back from the firing line. Despite his excellent performance on the first 2 targets, the missed final shot had significantly damaged his overall score for the phase. Maria approached her final shooting position, knowing that a strong performance here would essentially guarantee her victory in the overall competition. More importantly, it would send a message that could influence military policy for years to come. She had studied Morrison's shooting carefully and noticed that he had been fighting a slight crosswind that seemed to be strengthening. The wind conditions at 1,000 meters were always unpredictable, but the current situation was particularly challenging. As Maria settled into her shooting position, she became aware of the absolute silence that had fallen over the range. Even the normal background sounds of military base seemed to have been muted. The weight of dozens of pairs of eyes felt almost physical as she began her preparations. Unlike Morrison, Maria spent relatively little time on complex calculations. Her approach to long-range shooting emphasized reading environmental conditions through observation rather than mathematical formulas. She had learned to trust her instincts about wind and atmospheric conditions, a skill that had served her well in training, but had never been tested in such a high-stakes situation. Her first shot, at 600 meters, struck the target cleanly. The second, at 800 meters, was equally successful. As she prepared for the 1,000-meter shot that had defeated Morrison, Maria noticed that the wind had indeed strengthened and shifted slightly. She made a small adjustment to her aim point and controlled her breathing as she had been taught years earlier. The fundamentals of marksmanship were the same regardless of distance or pressure: sight alignment, trigger control, and follow-through. The rifle fired, and Maria watched through her scope as the bullet traced its path toward the distant target. At 1,000 meters, there was a significant delay between the shot and impact, time enough for doubt and second-guessing to creep into even the most confident shooter's mind. When the spotter's call came back confirming a direct hit, the reaction from the crowd was immediate and overwhelming. The female personnel who had been watching erupted in cheers, while even some of Morrison's supporters grudgingly applauded the exceptional shooting they had just witnessed. Maria stood and cleared her rifle with hands that were surprisingly steady considering what she had just accomplished. As she turned to face the crowd, she saw expressions ranging from amazement to respect to what might have been relief on the faces of the female soldiers present. General Hayes approached the firing line to personally review the final scoring. When she announced that Maria had achieved the highest combined score across all three phases, the celebration among the female personnel was impossible to contain. Morrison stepped forward and extended his hand to Maria, his expression showing genuine professional respect. "Outstanding shooting, Sergeant," he said formally. "I was wrong about your capabilities, and I apologize." The apology was clearly difficult for him, but it was also obviously sincere. Maria shook his hand firmly, recognizing the courage it took for him to admit his mistake publicly. "Thank you, Sergeant Morrison," she replied. "I hope we can work together effectively in the future." As the crowd began to disperse, Maria found herself surrounded by congratulations and questions. The female soldiers present were clearly energized by what they had witnessed, and several mentioned that they intended to apply for combat roles they had previously thought were beyond their reach. Colonel Richards approached with paperwork related to the competition results. "Sergeant Santos, I'll be filing a comprehensive report on today's demonstration. I expect it will receive significant attention at higher levels of command." Maria nodded, understanding that the real impact of her performance would be measured not in scoring points, but in policy changes and opportunities for other women in uniform. As she cleaned her rifle and prepared to return it to the armory, Maria reflected on the events of the morning. She had set out simply to prove herself to a skeptical colleague, but somehow found herself representing every woman who had ever wanted to serve in combat roles. The thought was both thrilling and sobering. Success brought responsibility, and she knew that her future performance would be scrutinized more carefully than that of her male counterparts. Every mistake would be analyzed for evidence that women weren't suited for combat roles, while every success would need to be exceptional to be taken seriously. But, for now, she had accomplished something significant. She had demonstrated that skill and determination mattered more than assumptions and stereotypes, and she had done it in front of people who had the power to create meaningful change. The afternoon training session proceeded normally, but Maria noticed a distinct change in how the other soldiers interacted with her. The open skepticism had been replaced by professional respect, and several soldiers who had previously dismissed her now sought her input on tactical questions. Morrison's attitude had changed most dramatically. During an afternoon briefing on reconnaissance techniques, he actually deferred to Maria's expertise on camouflage and concealment, acknowledging publicly that her methods were superior to his own. "Santos has a better understanding of natural concealment than anyone I've worked with," he told the group. "We should be learning from her, not questioning her qualifications." The transformation was remarkable, and it highlighted how much of the previous hostility had been based on assumptions rather than evidence. As evening approached, Maria realized that word of the morning's demonstration had spread throughout the entire base. Female soldiers from various units had found excuses to introduce themselves, and many shared stories about barriers they had faced in their own careers. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun, a helicopter mechanic, approached Maria after dinner with obvious excitement. "What you did today matters to all of us," she said. "I've been trying to transfer to flight training for 2 years, but I keep getting told that combat aviation isn't suitable for women. After today, I'm going to submit my application again." Similar conversations continued throughout the evening, and Maria began to understand the full scope of what had transpired. Her individual success had become a catalyst for change that extended far beyond her own career prospects. General Hayes requested a private meeting with Maria that evening, and they met in the general's office as the sun was setting. The general's demeanor was more relaxed than it had been that morning, and she offered Maria a seat before settling behind her desk. "Sergeant Santos, I want to discuss what happens next," the general began. "Your performance today was exceptional, but I need you to understand that you're now going to be under intense scrutiny. There will be people looking for any excuse to argue that today was a fluke or that women in combat roles create more problems than they solve." Maria had expected this conversation, and she had already been thinking about the implications. "I understand, ma'am. What do you need from me?" "I need you to be perfect," General Hayes replied bluntly. "It's not fair, and it's not right, but that's the reality. Every mission you undertake, every evaluation you receive, every interaction with your fellow soldiers will be analyzed by people who want you to fail. Can you handle that pressure?" The question hung in the air between them. Maria thought about her father's advice, about the importance of this moment for other women in uniform, and about her own determination to serve her country at the highest level possible. "Yes, ma'am," she answered firmly. "I can handle it." General Hayes smiled for the first time since Maria had met her. "I believe you can. Tomorrow, we'll begin discussing your assignment to the Special Operations Unit that this training exercise was designed to evaluate candidates for. Congratulations, Sergeant Santos. You've earned your place." As Maria left the general's office, she felt a mixture of pride, excitement, and apprehension about what lay ahead. She had achieved something significant, but she also knew that the real work was just beginning. The next morning brought news that would change everything once again. During the early morning briefing, Colonel Richards announced that the training exercise was being modified to include a live-fire field exercise that would test all candidates under conditions designed to simulate actual combat scenarios. More significantly, the exercise would be observed by a delegation of senior military officials and congressional representatives who were evaluating policies related to women in combat roles. Maria's performance the previous day had apparently attracted attention at the highest levels of government. This exercise will involve all candidates working together in small teams to complete complex tactical objectives, Colonel Richards explained. Performance will be evaluated not just on individual skills, but on teamwork, leadership, and adaptability under pressure. Maria realized that she would once again be performing under intense scrutiny, but this time the stakes were even higher. The previous day's shooting demonstration had been about proving her individual capabilities. This exercise would test whether she could function effectively as part of a combat team, and whether her presence would enhance or hinder unit effectiveness. The live-fire exercise began at dawn with teams of 4 soldiers, each assigned to infiltrate and secure a series of mock enemy positions scattered across a 20-square-mile training area. The scenario was designed to test every aspect of small unit tactics, from initial reconnaissance to final objective seizure. Maria found herself assigned to a team led by Captain James Rodriguez, a veteran infantry officer known for his tactical expertise and fair leadership style. The other team members were Corporal Mike Thompson, a communications specialist, and Private First Class David Kim, a combat engineer. Notably absent from her team was Morrison, who had been assigned to lead his own group. The delegation of senior officials and congressional representatives had established an observation post on a hill overlooking the training area, equipped with sophisticated monitoring equipment that would allow them to track every aspect of the exercise. General Hayes was present alongside politicians whose votes would determine funding and policy for military programs affecting women in combat roles. Captain Rodriguez gathered his team for their initial briefing, spreading a map on the ground and pointing to their assigned objectives. Their mission was to conduct reconnaissance on 2 enemy positions, eliminate specific high-value targets, and extract intelligence materials before withdrawing to a designated pickup point. "Santos, your marksmanship demonstration yesterday was impressive," Rodriguez began, "but this exercise will test different skills. I need to know that you can function effectively under combat stress while maintaining situational awareness and team coordination. Maria appreciated his direct approach. Unlike Morrison's hostility, Rodriguez's concern seemed genuinely focused on mission success rather than personal prejudices. "Understand, sir," she replied. "What do you need me to do?" Rodriguez outlined the team's plan of attack. Maria would serve as the designated marksman, providing overwatch and long-range fire support while the others maneuvered to their objectives. It was a role that played to her demonstrated strengths while requiring close coordination with teammates under stressful conditions. As they moved toward their first objective, Maria noticed the difference between this exercise and the previous day's shooting demonstration. The earlier competition had been conducted in controlled conditions with predictable variables. This exercise introduced chaos, uncertainty, and the kind of split-second decision-making that characterized actual combat. Their first challenge came within an hour of beginning the mission. While conducting reconnaissance on an enemy position, Thompson's radio equipment malfunctioned, cutting off their communication with higher headquarters and eliminating their ability to call for support or evacuation if things went wrong. Rodriguez quickly adapted to the equipment failure, establishing hand signals for coordination and modifying their approach to account for the loss of external communication. Maria was impressed by his calm professionalism under unexpected pressure. The first objective required eliminating 2 enemy soldiers positioned in a watchtower at a distance of approximately 400 meters. Maria established her firing position on a ridge that provided clear sight lines while remaining concealed from enemy observation. Through her rifle scope, she could see the targets clearly, but she was also aware of the observers monitoring every aspect of her performance. Unlike the previous day's demonstration, this shot would be taken under tactical conditions with teammates, depending on her accuracy for their safety during the subsequent assault. Maria controlled her breathing and made final adjustments for wind and distance. Her first shot struck the primary target cleanly, and her second eliminated the backup target before he could react to the initial attack. The shots were both accurate and precisely timed, allowing Rodriguez and his team to advance without encountering resistance. As they moved through the enemy position, Maria provided continuous overwatch, scanning for additional threats while her teammates searched for intelligence materials. The coordination was smooth and professional, exactly the kind of teamwork that the exercise was designed to evaluate. Their second objective proved more challenging. Intelligence indicated that a high-value target was located in a fortified building surrounded by multiple defensive positions. The approach would require careful planning and coordinated movement to avoid casualties. Rodriguez decided to split his team, with Thompson and Kim creating a distraction at the front of the building while he and Maria approached from the rear. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution, exactly the kind of complex operation that critics argued would be compromised by including women in combat units. Maria positioned herself to provide covering fire for Rodriguez's approach, while maintaining surveillance on the defensive positions that Thompson and Kim would need to neutralize. As the assault began, she found herself engaging multiple targets in rapid succession, her training taking over as the scenario developed. The mock battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours to Maria as she tracked threats, coordinated with teammates, and adapted to the changing tactical situation. When Rodriguez successfully secured the objective and signaled for withdrawal, Maria realized that she had performed exactly as her training had prepared her to do. During the withdrawal phase, their team encountered an unexpected complication that would test their adaptability under pressure. Kim had suffered a simulated injury during the assault, requiring evacuation while enemy reinforcements approached their position. Rodriguez made the decision to have Thompson establish a defensive position while he and Maria carried the wounded soldier to safety. The scenario required Maria to transition from her marksmanship role to that of a combat lifesaver, demonstrating the versatility that modern military operations demanded. As they moved toward the extraction point with Kim, Maria noticed movement in the tree line that indicated pursuing enemy forces. She quickly established a hasty firing position and engaged the threats while Rodriguez continued carrying their teammate. Her shooting was accurate and effective, but more importantly, it demonstrated her ability to maintain combat effectiveness while under stress and managing multiple responsibilities simultaneously. The kind of multitasking that critics often claimed women couldn't handle in combat situations. When they finally reached the extraction point, Maria was exhausted but satisfied with their team's performance. They had completed both primary objectives, adapted effectively to equipment failures and unexpected complications, and demonstrated the kind of unit cohesion that successful combat operations required. As the exercise concluded and teams reported to the debriefing area, Maria noticed that several of the congressional observers were engaged in intense discussions with General Hayes and other senior officers. Their expressions suggested that they had witnessed something that challenged their preconceptions about women in combat roles. Morrison approached Maria as she cleaned her rifle, his expression showing genuine professional respect. "Outstanding work out there, Santos," he said. "I watched your team's performance on the monitors, and your shooting under tactical conditions was even more impressive than yesterday's demonstration." The comment meant more to Maria than she expected. Morrison's opinion mattered because it came from someone with actual combat experience who understood the difference between range shooting and battlefield performance. Captain Rodriguez joined the conversation, adding his own assessment of Maria's contribution to the team's success. "Santos performed exactly like I would expect from any experienced combat soldier," he told Morrison. "Her presence enhanced our effectiveness rather than hindering it." The formal debriefing was conducted in a large conference room, with all team leaders presenting their after-action reports to the assembled observers. When Rodriguez described his team's performance, he specifically highlighted Maria's adaptability and technical proficiency under tactical conditions. "Sergeant Santos demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills while maintaining situational awareness and team coordination," he reported. "Her performance met or exceeded the standards I would expect from any soldier in similar circumstances." Following the formal presentations, General Hayes addressed the congressional delegation in a closed-door session that excluded the participating soldiers. Maria and the others waited outside, knowing that policy decisions affecting thousands of military careers were being discussed based partly on their performance during the exercise. When the meeting concluded, General Hayes emerged looking satisfied but cautious. She approached Maria directly, speaking quietly to avoid being overheard by other soldiers. "The delegation was impressed by what they witnessed," she said. "However, there will likely be additional evaluations and reviews before any policy changes are implemented. I want you to understand that your performance over the past 2 days has been exceptional, but the political process moves slowly." Maria nodded, understanding that lasting change would require more than a single successful demonstration. "What happens next, ma'am?" "Next, you complete this training exercise and hopefully earn your place in the Special Operations Unit," General Hayes replied. "Beyond that, you'll likely find yourself serving as an unofficial representative for women in combat roles. It's an additional responsibility that shouldn't fall on your shoulders, but it's the reality of breaking barriers." Over the following days, the remaining portions of the training exercise continued without major incident. Maria's performance remained consistently strong, and her relationships with fellow soldiers had evolved from skepticism to professional acceptance and, in many cases, genuine respect. The final evaluation results were announced on the last day of the exercise. Maria had not only qualified for the Special Operations Unit, but had earned one of the highest overall scores among all candidates. More significantly, her team leadership evaluations indicated that other soldiers were enthusiastic about serving with her in future operations. Morrison, who had also qualified for the unit, approached Maria after the announcement ceremony. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "You've changed my understanding of what makes an effective soldier. I hope we have the opportunity to work together in the future." The transformation in Morrison's attitude had been remarkable to witness. From someone who had actively questioned her qualifications, he had become one of her strongest advocates among the male soldiers in the unit. 3 weeks later, Maria received orders assigning her to an elite reconnaissance unit that would deploy to overseas operations within 6 months. The assignment was exactly what she had hoped for when she first applied for the Special Operations selection process. More importantly, she learned that policy recommendations had been submitted to senior military leadership based partly on observations from the training exercise. While the political process would take months or years to complete, the initial feedback was encouraging for expanding combat roles for qualified women. Captain Rodriguez, who had been assigned to lead the new reconnaissance unit, requested Maria specifically for his team. "I want the best soldiers available," he explained to Maria, "and that includes you, regardless of gender." The comment reflected the kind of merit-based evaluation that Maria had always hoped would define military service. Success based on demonstrated capability rather than assumptions or stereotypes. 6 months later, Maria found herself deployed to a forward operating base in a combat zone, serving as part of a reconnaissance team that included both Morrison and several other soldiers from the original training exercise. The unit's mission was to gather intelligence on enemy positions and conduct precision strikes on high-value targets. Her first combat mission came 3 weeks into the deployment. The team was tasked with eliminating an enemy sniper who had been targeting coalition forces from a position approximately 800 meters from their observation post. As Maria prepared for the shot that would engage an enemy combatant for the first time, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the initial skepticism and hostility to the gradual acceptance and professional respect, every challenge had prepared her for this crucial test of her capabilities. The enemy sniper was well concealed and extremely dangerous, having already killed 2 soldiers and wounded several others. Eliminating the threat would require exceptional marksmanship skills under combat stress, exactly the kind of scenario that had been simulated during the training exercise. Maria controlled her breathing and made final adjustment for distance and wind conditions. Through her rifle scope, she could see her target partially concealed behind rubble, with only a small portion of his silhouette visible. The shot would need to be perfect. Too high, and the bullet would strike concrete. Too low, and the enemy would escape to threaten more coalition soldiers. There was no margin for error. Maria squeezed the trigger with the same smooth, consistent pressure she had practiced thousands of times during training. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she watched through her scope as the bullet found its mark. The enemy sniper was eliminated with a single, precisely placed shot. The threat that had terrorized coalition forces for weeks had been neutralized by the soldier who had once been dismissed as unsuitable for combat roles. Morrison, who had been spotting for the shot, lowered his binoculars with obvious admiration. "Outstanding shooting, Santos," he said. "I couldn't have made that shot under those conditions." The successful mission was reported up the chain of command and eventually reached General Hayes, who was now serving in a senior Pentagon position focused on personnel policy. The report became part of a growing body of evidence supporting expanded combat roles for women. 2 years later, Maria was promoted to staff sergeant and asked to participate in a congressional hearing on women in combat roles. Sitting before a panel of senators and representatives, she was asked to describe her experiences and observations about gender integration in military units. "The most important lesson I've learned," she testified, "is that capability and determination matter more than gender or physical characteristics. When soldiers trust each other's abilities and work together toward common objectives, artificial barriers become irrelevant." Her testimony, along with performance data from hundreds of women serving in combat roles, contributed to policy changes that opened virtually all military specialties to qualified personnel regardless of gender. Looking back on the moment when she had challenged Morrison to the marksmanship competition, Maria realized that what had seemed like a simple dispute between 2 soldiers had actually been the beginning of a transformation that affected thousands of military careers and fundamentally change how the armed forces evaluated personnel. The general's face had indeed changed that day when Maria checked the M40 rifle. What had started as skepticism and doubt had evolved into recognition and respect, ultimately leading to opportunities that previous generations of women in uniform could never have imagined. Years later, when young female soldiers approached Maria for advice about pursuing combat roles, she always told them the same thing her father had taught her years earlier. Skill and preparation matter more than what other people think, but sometimes you only get one chance to prove yourself. The key was being ready when that chance arrived. Morrison, now a master sergeant, often served as an instructor for soldiers preparing for special operations selection. When teaching marksmanship fundamentals, he frequently used Maria's techniques as examples of proper shooting form and mental preparation. "The best shooter I've ever worked with," he would tell his students, "taught me that excellence comes from dedication to fundamentals, not from assumptions about who can or can't succeed." The transformation had been complete. The soldier who had once questioned whether women belonged in combat roles had become one of their strongest advocates, and his change of heart influenced hundreds of other soldiers throughout his career. Maria's story became part of military history, studied in leadership courses, and cited in policy discussions about barriers to service. But for her, the most important outcome was simpler. She had earned the right to serve her country at the highest level, and she had opened doors for others to follow. The M40 rifle that had seemed like such an insurmountable challenge during that first confrontation with Morrison had become a tool for proving that determination and skill could overcome any obstacle. When people asked who had let her touch the sniper rifle, the answer was clear. She had earned that right through demonstrated excellence, and no one could take it away from her. The general's face had changed because she had witnessed the future of military service. A future where capability mattered more than gender, where excellence was recognized regardless of its source, and where artificial barriers gave way to merit-based evaluation. That future had arrived not through political mandates or social pressure, but through the simple act of a determined soldier stepping up to prove herself when the opportunity arose. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single shot fired in the right direction at exactly the right moment.